Thanks for being
here.
Cool.
Thank you for having me, Pam. It's always an honor. Shouts out to Nebraska Enterprise Fund for sponsoring the event. Shouts out to Elevator Spaces for hosting us. And then my name's Chris Beecham. I'll talk a little bit more about myself at the end, but essentially I run a little Google Ads agency. So Google Ads, that's just the biggest of the ad platforms. That's a lot of just helping people show up on searches, getting their images across the web. And then it's a lot of like trial and failure when you run a little business like that. And so almost the whole like core of today's talk is just a lot of people make these same mistakes whenever they do online advertising. So at the end of the talk today, if you can just be able to like identify what those problems are, what are the symptoms, could I maybe be affected by one of these? That's really what I want the main takeaway to be. And then the name of my talk today is Online Advertising Strategies. And so this is, of course, like what types of ads should we run? Who should our audience be? How much should we be spending? And so we're going to obviously talk a lot about this, what that would look like if you have a small budget and you're just getting started. Once you're successful and we're starting to make some money, how do we ramp it up and scale successfully? But to just talk about the like online strategies, I think would miss a lot. Because with the whole online advertising thing, there's really two components that make it special and make it different from traditional advertising. And that's with online advertising, you can actually see which of your ads impacts your sales. And then to complement that, once you know what's working and what doesn't working, it gives advertisers a ton of control, which means you can literally just stop doing the ads that stink, only focus on your ads that are good. In the world of marketing, there's this thing called the 80-20 principle, and like it's almost exists in a lot of different areas. But in short, what that means is if you're running 5 ads or you have 5 different audiences, it's a good chance that like 4 of the ads stink or you're just cutting even with. And so with the whole strategy is basically be able to figure out your well-performing ads from the bad-performing ads, then double down on that. But what's interesting to me is almost where this whole thing falls apart, because it almost sounds so simple in theory. And then I've been to some talks like this myself, and then you get pumped up and you like go and you look at your own screen, and then it's like, what am I missing here? Like something's off. And so where often it falls apart is right here in this area of measuring the success. That's the number one most common and most expensive mistake. And then once you know this, you actually have to double down on your best messages, on your best audiences. That sounds simple, but that's almost the most complicated part. And so at the end of the talk, I want you guys to just figure out like how these things all sort of fit together, but then also which ads will make sense for you, how to actually set it up so you can know if you're successful or not. And then once everything's in place, how do we double down on the best ads, best products, best messages? And the other thing here, I'm aiming for about 45 minutes. And if anyone has questions, I have about like 3 different spaces within the talk. And so just blurt it out. I like questions. It almost makes it go better. So the more questions, the better the presentation. Everyone else is probably thinking the same thing if you have a question. And so the first portion is just going to be the online advertising strategies. What ads make sense for me? What are my options even? And then I want to really focus on how do I get by with a smaller budget. I know a lot of people here are just startup businesses. And so with that, small budgets, I want to start with just the main types of ads. And so the most common is called the display ad or the image ad. This would just be if you're on any website anymore, there's so many pop-ups, there's so many ad spaces. That's just called the display ad. And then this is really common in like Facebook or LinkedIn. This is the main type of ad people think about. And then of course we have video ads. And these work a lot of the same way as the image ads. And then finally we have search, which I'll get to here in the end, kind of put a pin in that. Search is great. That's what I do for my day job. It's almost the most expensive type of ad. And so for small budgets, I have which ads make sense. I have all three of these. I would say with the caveat that search is the most expensive. And so you need to be really careful with that. But then, yeah, basically any type of ad can work. But the mistake I see people make has to do with the audiences. And so, for example, with Facebook ads, a lot of people, if you just go on Facebook and say, I want to do a promoted post, they're happy to take your money and help you promote your thing. But by default, it'll just show to everybody in the US. And so just the number one thing, if you are doing a Facebook ad, is set up an audience. And my slide here says geography times retargeting. And so how to decipher that is whenever you set up an audience in Facebook ads or Google ads or LinkedIn, any of these things, the first thing you do is called geofencing. And that's simply just where do you want your ad to show? And then with audiences, you layer them on top of each other. So it can get really complicated, but in short, I would say only people in this area. And then I have the retargeting. And so that's if you've ever been on a website looking at a watch or something, and then all of a sudden you see that watch ad like following you around everywhere. That's called retargeting. And so the other way to think of that is it's just a regular display ad, but then your audience is only people who have gone to your website. And really the high level idea here is when you're just getting started, the best audience is like your existing customers / people who already know who you are. And then once you get bigger, then it's time, okay, how do we like bring in new people? That can get expensive. But I think the number one thing for people with small budgets is like, you know, if you're selling to real estate agents, people probably aren't going to buy your product on the first time they sign up. So you really need to hit them a couple times. And so yeah, the best bet is retargeting. The downside is there's only so many people who go to your website. And so oftentimes this will be the best performing ad. People say, okay, now let's double down on this. And it's really hard to do that because first of all, there's only so many people, but that brings us into the next section, which is the spend. And with these online advertising platforms, it uses something called a cost per click model. And this gets a little confusing. I'll go into it a little bit more, but to keep it simple, in a lot of other forms of advertising, you will tell them your whole budget and you say, here's how much I want to spend. It's completely different with online advertising where, first of all, you do tell them your budget, but then you say within this, I'm only going to pay a certain amount per click. And in short, the whole name of the game is really like how much does it make sense for you to pay for one click? And the answer is always like, oh, well, it depends. Like if it's a clicker and they're not going to buy, I don't want to spend anything. But if it's a good person, it's like, I'd be willing to pay more. And so the balance is how much do we want to pay and for which audience? And so in short, if there's someone who's just thinking about getting started, we have a small budget, you know, maybe we're like the Omaha Data Science Academy. You might even do the gist of your marketing through social media and email. But then if you want to just get started, the best way to do it are these retargeting ads. And with search, for example, that can get expensive. That can be like $1 a click, $5 a click. I mean, it can go up to $100 in weird circumstances. But just with these $3 or $4 click, that adds up quick, especially if your audience is messed up. And so the whole idea is a lot of people will go in, they'll say, hey, Chris, this is my budget. And it's like, okay, that's cool. But what you really need to be thinking about is like how much you'd be willing to pay for one click. And some people will say, oh, well, like I would only pay like 1 cent per click or like 25 cents per click. And that sounds kind of ridiculous, but that's actually a really good strategy. And so the whole thing is if you set up like a Google search ad and it should be $5 and you only go and say, I want to pay 25 cents. You would think that would never show, but it actually does. And so the one thing is just like being as cheap as possible with your clicks. And Google will tell you, here's how much we recommend you pay. Facebook does the same thing. But just, I think the most interesting of these strategies is take whatever Google tells you you should pay, or LinkedIn, and then say, I'm only going to pay 1/10 of that. And you'd think that you wouldn't get any clicks. And oftentimes you might not. But with this whole cost per click model, nobody ever sees your ad. You don't actually pay anything. And so for anyone who's hesitant or cheap, I would just go way under the bid and start with that like way lowball offer and just slowly, incrementally go up 25 cents. And then soon you're going to discover that you're getting a lot of clicks and it's worth it. The other thing, just why I'm on this is I do a lot of calls like with Google and the Google reps. And they would say like, absolutely do not do this, just because they have an incentive to like have people bid a certain amount. And then the other thing, and I'm going to hit on this in the second half of the presentation, but one of the big trends right now is automation, of course, in like every single online thing and with ads. And what that looks like is, it is tricky to figure out your audiences and how much you should spend. Once you kind of figure it out, you almost leave it. But once you're still figuring out, that can be tricky. And so what Google is saying is, we'll tell you how much you should be paying per click. We'll tell you how much, like what audiences to use. And that they're pretty good with the audiences, but where it really goes wrong is whenever you have Meta tell you how much you should be paying per click, which is Meta, by the way, is Facebook and Instagram. Whenever you have them tell you how much to pay per click, it's always like 4 or 5 times higher than you can actually get away with. And so a lot of people have probably been doing some ads. Most people that do this for the first time will go and they'll have Google set it up for them, have Meta set it up for them. And if that's you, I would say one thing to try is just go in and you can switch. It's called your bid. Your bid is how much you pay for one click. But just set that at like 1/5 of whatever you're paying now. So if you're paying $1, set it to 20 cents. It's likely you might not get any impressions at all, but you're not wasting money. And then it's like you raise that thing up and you're going to discover that, hey, we can actually get by with 50 cents instead of $1. And again, this is just something that if you do the whole like Google recommended way, they'll never actually let you do that strategy. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to say is with the small budget strategy, a lot of people like will wait forever to advertise online. And then they'll say like, okay, now I have a $1,000 budget or a $3,000 budget. But I would almost recommend starting out like sooner with a smaller budget. And one of the things is that, for example, on Facebook, by just paying a little bit, it actually unlocks a lot of capabilities. Particularly with the audiences. And so if you were to do a regular Facebook post and kind of send it out to anybody, it'll mostly go to your followers, your fans. But by saying, I want to do like the $1 a day or the cheapest clicks, Facebook will then say, okay, well, like, who do you want to see your ad? Who do you want to see your post? And so even by just doing that like smallest amount, you really unlock these different audiences. And a lot of people don't really realize that. And then what happens a lot of times is that once they start spending a bunch, then they'll figure out the audiences. Where if you can figure it out earlier on, cheaper, once you are successful, you're going to be set up a lot better. And so big budgets, this slide looks very similar. The types of ads. It's still these main 3 types of ads. And so where it gets different though is your audiences. And so when you start, I would say the best bet is retargeting only people who already know who you are. With Google ads, that's like people who have been to your website. With Facebook ads, that could be people who have seen your post or engaged with your page in different ways. But then the other option is, how do we get new people? Obviously, once we like have tapped our existing people. And what this looks like is there's interest-based targeting. And so if you run the Data Science Academy, you could say, I want to target people who are interested in data, in technology, in education. And this is something that sounds great, but it really, like, performance-wise is not as great as you think. But once you have a big budget, it can be worth it. And so there's interests. Of course, there's demographic targeting. And this would be, I only want women of a certain age, or like for the man cave, you only want men, certain age. And then these things, again, you layer on top of each other. And so the men of certain age in this area, you could say, who are even interested in sports teams and cars for for the different ads would have the different audiences. And then the final one for the big budgets is email lists. And this is actually kind of going back to your existing customers. But within Facebook and Google, they have an option where you can upload a giant list of everyone who has consented to give you their email. And then they'll actually show your ads just to them. The thing about this is you have to spend about like $10,000 to even like become eligible for this. And so I'm kind of like Abby, where I do like freelancing. And I've told people this right away. Oh, you should do the email list, only to find out it's like, oh shoot, we can't do this until we spend way more. And so I just put this in here because within Google, the whole trend is to use your own, they call it first party data. But you really can only do this if it's a big budget. And then I also wanted to put this in here just to emphasize the point that once you spend more, they actually do give you different tools. And so they'll start taking your calls, Google and Facebook, which is hard to do if you're a small guy. And then the final point here is the spend. And so, yeah, a lot of people will go, okay, we're not doing any advertising, but once we do, we want to have a big budget and we want to go hard. Where I think the better strategy is you want to the whole name of the game is how much should I pay for one click? And so once you figure out that minimum amount you can get away with, you really want to scale it up as slow as possible. And so what happens is if someone is doing like a search ad, I want to target people who are looking for clip art. And let's say you are doing great at 25 cents a click. Just, you will be doing great. And so what happens is people paying 25 cents a click, we're killing it every dollar, we're making $2, and they'll say, okay, Chris, let's scale this up, let's double it, let's triple it. But then what that looks like is you go from paying 25 cents a click to like 75 cents a click or $1 a click. And then if you kind of reverse think about it, if you were to spend $100 at 25 cents, you're getting 400 people a day. But as soon as you go up to 50 cents, you're getting half the people. And so the whole name of like clicks, it seems so incremental and small, but it's just like going from 25 cents to 50 cents, you're going to get half the people. And so as you scale up, the whole thing is, it's not really what should your budget be, it's how much should I be paying for one click. And before I get to questions, I want to do a special note on search ads. And even before I get into this, the main difference between the video ads and search ads is just the price. Search is by far the most expensive. It performs really well, and the whole kind of general theory is the reason it's great is because you're showing your ad to that person right at the moment they're looking for like Omaha headshots. Whereas if your like ad is on Facebook, they might see it, but they're like they're really looking for like pictures of cats or their grandkids or whatever. And so, yeah, by search, you're not showing at all to the cat lady. You're just showing to the person who wants your ad wants the photography at that moment. But then, yeah, the downside of search is that it's expensive. And so with everything else, what you really got to do is just test out a bunch of different types of ads and messages. And you really need to do that same thing with search. But the difference with search is that beforehand, you can really figure out if it makes sense at all for you. And it's by doing this thing called keyword research. And the example here is a food delivery company. And just food is a kind of a low margin, high competitive area. And so if you were to Google like food delivery or food near me, it's a lot of like Grubhub national brands, which if you're a small business, it's just tough to compete with. And so, to do this, you have to get an idea of how much you should pay per one click, which is, we can talk about that. But just the point here is when a lot of people do this keyword research, they're going to figure out it's like, this does not make any sense for me at all. Like with the food people, they were telling me, oh, Chris, we make about like $15 for one sale. But then already like you can see some of these clicks are $19. And it's like, you don't got to be a math scientist to realize it's like, okay, that's never going to work. You really need about like 50 clicks for one sale. But then the reverse is also true, where there's some where it's like, for the enterprise fund, you know, if we can find one person who needs money, that could be worth like thousands of dollars over the long run. So we're willing to pay like a couple $100 for one sale. Then you do the research. Oh my God, it's only $1 a click. Like, let's go. And the other thing that'll happen is by doing the keyword research, you can get an idea of like which search terms you should actually show up on. And whenever I do this, it's always like, you'll come up with a list and you'll think, oh, these keywords are going to be great. These searches are going to be terrible. And then once you actually run it, it's never quite how it goes. But it is, the one thing that's pretty reliable is how much you'll actually end up paying. And so with search, the one thing I would say is just do this keyword research. And before I open it up for questions, I was doing this sort of a similar talk last month with the Startup Academy about, it was actually about Google Ads. And someone asked me, they say, hey, Chris, how come Google search ads is such a great type of ad for startups? And I sort of thought about it for a second. And the truth is that it's not necessarily a great type of ad for all startups. With these search ads, certain industries are way better than others. I would say the best performers I see are a lot of like local businesses, locksmiths, lawnmower guys. I think there's a factor of there's not a lot of competitors doing it. They make a good amount per sale. Some of the tougher ones are anything where it's more national and it's like lower cost. So a lot of technology companies, it's like, oh, we're a software as a service type deal. A lot of times that implies that it's pretty cheap, like per month. But then there's probably a lot of competition. And so basically both of these people, like if you're this lawnmower guy, I would say do search right away. If you're the big company, you would almost think they have a bigger budget and search would make more sense for them. But the reason that backfires is because it's also true for their competitors with the big budgets. And so these things get bid up. Anyways, the point I'm trying to make with the whole keyword research slide is search is going to make sense for some businesses. And before you do anything else, this would almost be where I start. And just does search make sense for me at all? If not, then it's like, okay, great. Now I know just to focus on the display and the YouTube. And so does anyone have questions on just the advertising? And then just stop me at any point if you do. And so essentially the two things I want to get across is your audience is almost going to be the main area where people mess up. Like if I'm doing the Facebook ads, by default, it shows to everyone in the country where you really got to get targeted and layer these things on top of each other. Start with just the people you know and then add on more. And then the other area where people mess up is their cost per click, well, they'll say, here's my budget. Google, you decide, you tell me how much I should be paying per click, which they're happy to do. But then the result is you end up paying $1 instead of 25 cents, and you get 100 people to your site instead of 400. And so set your audiences targeted, but then the main thing is set your bids 1/4 of what Google says. And so Emiliano, welcome.
Hey, Chris. See you.
Emiliano is the head boss at Elevator. Okay, and then this is a quote I was told all through my career as like a fledgling marketing intern. Basically, I remember the first time I ever heard this, I was going to my boss. I worked at like a data company in Omaha, and I had this report and I was showing him how great I was doing. And I was basically saying, oh, we need to double down on the thing I'm doing for you guys. And he goes, Chris, have you ever heard the quote? He goes, half my marketing works. The problem is I don't know which half. And you'll hear this all the time if you're in the marketing field. The implication is, since we don't know which half of the marketing works, which half doesn't, almost don't change anything because I don't want you to mess up the thing that works. And we're basically just going to let things go as is. And, you know, in truth, there's something to this. With the online advertising, you can connect the spend to the sales. It's not perfect. And so there's always a little element of this. But just what I think is interesting is the implications. You know, since we don't know what's working, we're not going to try anything new. But then the thought is like, if you did know what works, like how would you actually like adjust your ads? And so the second half of the talk here is just going to be about, A, how do we actually see what works? And then once we know what's working, how do we double down on that? And so this brings us to sort of the most technical portion of the talk, conversion tracking. And this is one of my key teaching points of the presentation today is just what is a conversion? So within Google Ads, within Facebook ads, LinkedIn ads, they all use the same term, which is conversion. And a conversion can be different things for different companies. It's sort of the main goal of your website. So if you're selling signs online, it might be an online sale. It could also be anytime someone Googles directions to my store. It could also be whenever someone signs up for the I'm interested email that I can target to them later. And the other big one is just leads. And so like if you do the photography, like Josh, people aren't buying online. They're saying, hey, contact me, and then let's do this deal offline. And the whole point of conversion tracking is partly A, to connect the thing to your sales, but then also it just gives you a level playing field to compare all your different ads against each other. And so earlier we were talking about it's common if you have 5 audiences that 4 of them aren't very good. Without setting up conversion tracking, you'll never really be able to tell one is better than the other. And so this is a single area where the advertising strategies get messed up. And, you know, the more this thing gets automated, the bigger the problem the conversion tracking setup is. And my analogy would be, think of a factory that's completely automated. Everything's going. If you get one thing off though, the whole system can really start to pile up. It can be a whole disaster. This is the area where people's ads get messed up, is conversion tracking. And I would just ask you guys to think, okay, if I were to do ads, first of all, what would be my site's conversion? What would be more? I have how to set it up, and then the next one is the mistakes, which almost is like the best slide. But first of all, conversion tracking, what we're talking about is how to send your sales to Google Ads so Google can see which of your messages actually is good, which are bad. Same thing with Facebook. And then this is by far the trickiest part to set up when doing online advertising. And there's 2 steps. The first one is to set up a tag on each page of your website. And the word tag, I should have put that in like italics or underlined it or something. Really what that is, it's a piece of code here. And so I have the example Google ad. This goes on the back end part of your website. So the actual people, your visitors, are never going to see it. And what it does is essentially just send information to Google, sends information to Facebook. And then, yeah, all online advertising platforms kind of work the same way, where they have these tags. You need to put the tag on your site so you can send your information to LinkedIn, to like TikTok or whatever. But then once you do that, the second thing you have to do is actually tell Google what your conversions are. And so in my example here, I'll show you where this goes wrong. But in short, what you really want to do is have one main conversion and say, hey, Google, hey, Facebook, just optimize everything around this one goal. And then the whole idea at the end of the day is figuring out the good audiences and bad audiences. And you can also say, well, okay, Chris, I don't just sell stuff online. You know, I might have the stores. I might have like the academy I want people to sign up for. And so you can do something called the secondary conversion, which is you still send your key events to Google, to Facebook, but you're just telling them, hey, don't actually optimize around this. I just kind of want to know for my own record if my sales are impacting email signups. Email signups is not my main goal. And this is a little bit technical, but where it really goes wrong is there's sort of 3 main mistakes people will make. And these are all almost different variations of the configuration. So what I mean is almost everyone who does this gets the tag or the Facebook pixel set up on their site, but then they never actually bother to go in and set it up. And so the biggest mistake is not tracking any conversions at all. And I have an example on my next slide of what this looks like. The almost worst mistake is tracking everything as a conversion. And so we were talking earlier about if you could have Google set up your conversions for you and like, oh, we'll scan your site, we'll see everything. That can go completely haywire. And so I just did one the other day. It was the person's goal was to have them fill out the contact us form and then they would close the deal offline. But then what happened is they had a couple of forms on their site, one being their search bar. And so anytime people would do a search, Google would say, hey, you're welcome. Like, we got a new sale for you. You guys really need is like, we're going to up your budget since you're doing so well. But just the point of having this one conversion mistake, having that one error just ruined the whole thing for them. Because it's not only we're going to raise your budget, it's we've figured out the best message for you. We figured out the best audience. But it's like, okay, you're kind of missing the whole point. We're not trying to get people to search. We're trying to get people to buy. And so, yeah, problem number 1, not having any conversions. Problem number 2, everything is a conversion. And then this third one, this is a lot more technical, but it's really common. It's called cross-domain tracking. And in short, a lot of people's conversions, that could be the signups, might happen on a separate website. For example, like Elevator uses a service called HubSpot. And one of the tools they have is a calendar where you can, hey, come in, let us know what time you want to tour the space, give us your contact information, and, you know, we're happy to have you. The hard part is that the calendar, the HubSpot calendar is actually on a whole different website. And then they make it tricky to put your tags on their site. And even once you do able to get your tags on the HubSpot site or your donation site, or some people will have like a third-party shopping cart just because it's more secure. What happens is they'll say, okay, Elevator Spaces, we found out which of your ads is the best. They say all your people that sign up, they all come from this one place. they all come from your website. And it's kind of like, yeah, no, duh, they come from my website, but like, which marketing channel do they come from? And in short, it's not too tricky to set up. And this is just so common. This problem is called cross-domain tracking. And you really want to get your website and the HubSpot acting as one big site. You want, or same with the donations or just anything. And so I just wanted to put this in here because a lot of people will have this and not ever realize it. And so if your signups happen on HubSpot or if they happen on any sort of website that's not your main URL, there's a big chance this is going to affect you. And then let's like, what does this look like? And this is my favorite slide. I've done a couple of talks with Elevator before. Every time I do this same slide, but this is kind of what I do for my day job is I do the Google ads, and then each month I meet with my clients and we'll say, okay, let's look at what went well, what went wrong. And when I first started, this is what a lot of my dashboards look like, a lot of my reports. So we have your 3 types of ads, or this could be your 3 products, or this could be your 3 audiences. And then oftentimes it's like, oh, our signs, it's like no one's buying the car signs, everyone's buying the sports signs. But then you really only realize that after you've tested everything out. And without the conversion tracking, or with the conversion tracking messed up, again, I said the biggest problem is, the most common is people just never even do anything. And so with this, you would think, oh, the best performing ad is number C, because we spent 400, we got 600 people. And how Google works and Facebook is kind of like, oh, we'll optimize for this. But then sometimes the cheapest ads are the cheapest just because they're the worst performing. And so the whole point is, without conversion tracking, you might think your best ad is number C, or not number C, letter C, you know what I meant. When you have it set up, it could be the exact opposite, where it was really your best bet is to be on your B audience. And, you know, with this, we were talking, it's like, yeah, once you start, there's that Mike Tyson quote, like everyone has a plan until you get punched in the mouth and like actually do it. It's the same thing with advertising. You have your plan, but then once you go out there, it's like, man, what I thought was going to work isn't working. How do I adjust? And so the whole point is you need to have this conversion tracking set up. This is by far the number one most expensive mistake. If you have the 100 different conversions, that's where it's going to go haywire. If you have no conversions, it can go haywire. And then this is my last slide on the tracking section, but this is almost something people could take a picture of. And it's just the different tools that are used. And so anymore, every single website has their own sort of analytics. WordPress is really popular. Shopify, Wix. These all work pretty well. With the caveat that some of these still don't have the conversion set up, so just watch out for that. But basically, a lot of people will say, oh, Chris, I already have, tracking set up on my Wix or on my whatever site. And that's true. And that's a pretty good place to start. But basically, you need to understand that there are a lot more tools and kind of how they all fit together. And so, yeah, how a lot of people start is I have my website. It's keeping track of my data. The second tool is called Google Analytics. For the longest time, the Shopify's and the Wix didn't really have a capability to capture data. And so what everyone used was this thing called Google Analytics. It's completely free. It can not only see your best ads, but it can really see every type of marketing channel, such as how does my email stack up to social media, to the ads. And so with Google Analytics, this is a good option if you're not happy with the main one. But then the whole point with tracking, what people miss is it's not important that you have your own Shopify analytics set up right or your Google Analytics. The only thing that matters is really at the end of the day, does Google Ads know which ads is good? Does Facebook Ads know which ads is good? And then to set that up, you need that thing called the pixel. And again, that's just this piece of code. And so every single ad platform works the same way, where we have our own pixel, put it on your site so we can send all the data to our platform. And then the next step after that is once you have the piece of code on your site, you need to actually configure it to tell us which forms is the right form. And then this can get tricky, but there's this cool tool called the Tag Manager. And so what happens a lot of times is, I might have the Facebook tag and the Google tag and my Google Analytics tag and this other one, and it can just get kind of a mess. And then each one you have to be sending it the different informations. And so long story short, this tool, Google Tag Manager, helps people organize all these tags. It helps also, I'll set this up on a lot of people's sites. And if you have an advertising person going in and making changes, it's very possible that they can mess something up and all of a sudden your site's not working. So Google Tag Manager, one of the big benefits of that is just it makes it harder for someone like me or someone unexperienced who's just doing this for the first time to mess things up. And so Google Tag Manager. And then my last one is this Google Tag Assistant plugin. And this is an extension you can put on any browser, or on the Chrome browser, excuse me. But then what it will do is it can scan the web page for tags. And so I can go on any site and you can see, Clip Art Monster has a Google Ads tag on the site. So, okay, you can get a good idea of are my competitors, what are they doing? Are they doing Facebook? Are they doing Google? And then the other big problem people have is you want these tags to be on all the pages, including your HubSpot calendar or your donation site. And the tag assistant can just check, okay, do I have my tag on this page? And before you try to configure it, just getting the tags on these different pages can be tricky. But I would highly recommend this one plugin. I use it nonstop all day. And it'll even tell you if there's an error, there's different ways you can mess this up. But yeah, so in short, a lot of people have their own website tools, but then if you want to send your data from your website to Google or to Facebook, this is when you need to start getting all this other stuff in place. And so a lot of people won't even bother setting up the Google Tag Manager until they do the ads, which makes a lot of sense. But it's just kind of good to know even before you start what your options are. That was a lot in there. This is pretty technical part, tracking ads. Does anyone have questions when it comes to conversions or anything like that? Or anyone ever done this and set it up wrong?
I mean, I set it up time.
Yeah.
And I'll set it right too.
Yeah, and then Steve is you teach a whole data science meetup. So you think, this is the type of person that would have it set up. But it's really easy to get these things set up wrong. And then obviously, if you do, this is kind of the number one cardinal sin that is going to lead you to wasting money. And so finally, we come to the third portion of the talk. Okay, now that I know what's working. Waylon, do you have a question?
Yeah, my question, I guess the question was, what kind of timelines do you usually look at for improving SEO or SEO? And two, with the algorithms always changing, how do you stay up to date on, what's working and what's not on SEO?
Yeah, so I'll answer this second part first. You're saying with everything constantly changing, how do you keep up to date? And really, you got to be constantly evolving and constantly testing new things. That's the whole sort of idea of the cycle. And so really the best way to do it is almost I would say, first of all, once a month is kind of how I do a deep dive of everything and see what's working. And so you said SEO, so that's kind of like free showing up on Google, which is a little bit different. I'm focusing a bit more on paid ads right now.
Or
But
just in general, the algorithms for all the online marketing,
yeah.
they're all changing. So some of these stand down from that.
Yeah, so yeah, with Google, it's not only is it constantly changing, but it's also they're kind of vague on when they do make the change and once they change, like what they actually changed. And so, yeah, it's a real problem and you're really operating in the dark a lot, since the whole idea is, oh, if Google were to tell everyone how it works and everyone would like reverse engineer and spam the system. And so they need to keep it all secret. But really the best way to stay up to date is just like constantly advertising, seeing what works. And then this last part is once you know what's working, or once you realize that it's like, hey, something's off and we're not getting the same performance, then really it's your time to go in and start making changes. And so to give you a direct answer, like how long does it take? I would say it takes about like 3 months to get a good baseline of what to expect. And then once you have the baseline, then you're really going to be able to see, okay, like something's off. Or the other part of this is once you get your stuff set up right, it's almost like, hey, let's just don't touch anything now that we actually figured out what's right. But then, yeah, what happens is we had it figured out right. We were doing great. And then all of a sudden Google changed something. And so I think the real answer is you just got to constantly like be watching this every like week at the most, or I always say just every month. I think if you check it too often, you kind of like become numb and sort of glaze over it. But yeah, I would say, yeah, it's hard to keep up with the constant changes because they're so vague and they're not even telling you what's changing. But then what it looks like is all of a sudden we're spending the same amount getting half the conversions. And then that's when you really have to come in and say, okay, now that we know something's off, we need to really be making some changes. And what's interesting to me about this last part, and that's actually a good segue, is the whole trend now is AI, and I'm going to get to this on the next slide. And so on my side, I said, now that we know what's working, am I even able to make adjustments? And then once you are, it's like you want to really double down on what's working and what's not. But yeah, the trend right now is AI, and I'm calling this manual setup versus automated setup. And that's really not the best way to put it, because some people think, oh, is my ads going to be completely manual or completely automated? It's not an either or thing. With the automated ads, you still need to like tell Google some of what you want your ad to say, who your audiences are. And then with the manual, it's only really setting it up the first time. Then once it's set up, it'll run it. But the point is there's not that many areas that you can control with these ad platforms. Of course, you have your own message, what I want to be saying to the world. Once you figure that out, it's okay, my audience, who do I want to be seeing my message? Different audiences might see different messages, like the sports sign audience. Obviously, we're going to be seeing sports signs. With the cars, they'll be seeing something else. And then the last one is your spend. But just in terms of manual versus automated setup, when you do a new, let's say, Google Ads account, they almost don't even give you the option to set it up manually. They do. They just say, oh, we don't think you would like this since you're a new advertiser. And really the automated setups can be really good. They're getting better fast every day. The main problem though is they don't let people make changes once it's live. And so in short, before I get into manual adjustments, oftentimes the setup is the most important part, just figuring out the initial message and the audience. And then once you get that set up, the question is, okay, how much should we be paying for this keyword versus that audience? And really that just takes some trial and error. Oftentimes of the 5 ads, 4 of them won't be very good. You're only going to realize that the bad ones are good or bad ones are bad once you've been doing it for a bit. And so that's the name of the game is, okay, this audience will pay $1 for their click, but for this other product, it might only be 25 cents. And then a lot of people will start up, hey, start everything at 50 cents a click. And then if it's a good performer, spend more. If it's bad, spend less. That can be complicated in itself. But the point is, with these automated ads, it's almost like we'll set it up for you in the beginning, and then Google will optimize everything moving forward. And a lot of people don't realize that they're actually forfeiting the capability to adjust their ads once live by doing these automated campaigns. I was talking with Pam earlier about this. But then, a lot of people, basically what that would be is, you're doing great and you're like, for every dollar you're spending, you're making $2, but we're not going to tell you which audiences are leading to which sale, or we're not going to tell you which message is leading to which sale. This has to do with, it's called the black box problem. And Nate could probably talk more about this, but within AI, the whole black box principle is the idea that these systems get so complicated that we can only see what goes in and what goes out. We have no idea what's going on in the middle. And the reason this stinks, there's a couple of reasons it stinks. One is just transparency. And so sometimes Google or Facebook will have an incentive to fill unsold ad slots. And so they'll do that. But then the other thing that stinks about that is, not everyone that does advertising is going to be profitable. In fact, most are not. But by going through this product process, you can see maybe I never actually made money on it. But one thing I realized is that the, sports sign is actually much bigger and more lucrative than the car sign. Now that I know that, you can use that in your social media, your email. There's a lot of different ways. Or this insurance product is better than that insurance product. Even if your ads aren't successful, it's that can almost be worth it on itself. If you choose to do this automated setup, you're going to lose out on all of that. And so just kind of the advertising strategy here is you want to be able to do both. And so automated is the future. AI is going to take over the whole world probably. Until then, it will have some good things for us. But for the advertisers, you really want to be able to do manual so you can see the audience. And then we talked about this earlier, but the biggest downside of going fully automated has to do with the spend. And the name of the game is how much you should be paying for one click. If you have Google tell you how much you should be paying per click, you're only ever going to get half the people you could. And so the downside of doing this manual strategy is that it's complicated. And that's essentially what Google says. They're saying, this is getting so complicated now with cookies and different devices that don't even bother trying to figure it out because you're not as smart as our supercomputers. And it is really complicated, but in short, it's not that complicated. And when we talk about making adjustments, really what this is once your ads are live, what are the tools that we have control over? What are the different levers we can push? And really this comes down to two things. It's first of all, is just refining your audiences. And what this would be is I have negative keywords. So that would be if you're doing a search campaign and you're doing for insurance, there could be a lot but basically one of the tools you have in your tool belt is, we're getting a lot of people searching for insurance calculators, for example. I just pulled that out of my hat. But if you can see none of these people are ever even getting close to converting, okay, we'll just set that as a negative keyword and we'll just slowly refine our audience. And so when you set it up, it's kind of smart to start, I call it the wide net, and then just slowly bring the net in. Once you go a couple of months, you'll have a good idea of these are my good keywords, these are my bad keywords. Once you get your negative keywords set up too, like I work with a bunch of charter bus companies. And so we would accidentally show the people searching for like Omaha bus tickets. They're just trying to do the city bus instead of hire one. Anyways, once you get all the negatives set up, you can almost just like leave it. And so it takes about 3 months to get this set up. The other tool you have in refining is placement. So this would be if you're doing a video ad or an image ad. A lot of times how it goes is people will say, like I worked with a marriage counselor the other day and they said, okay, I want my ad to show up on sites that have to do with like divorce or people searching for kind of like infidelity related articles just because, oh, those people would be great to, come in and have a session. But then what happens is a lot of them will show up on, it's like, oh, your number one site was like relationships today. It's like, oh, this is great. But then it'll show you the actual like articles it showed up on. And a lot of them might have nothing to do with divorce. Just like, oh, these are the 10 like green flags. Or it could just be like, oftentimes you'll see a lot of these have nothing to do with my product, which sucks when you realize that because it's like, dang, I just spent a bunch of money on that. But then the good news is it's like, once you realize what's working, what's not, you can just not advertise on those anymore. And so you want to really bring the net in, refine everything. And then the final part is, okay, once we know kind of our keywords, our audiences, the last question is just how much should we be paying for each one? And with this, you really want to just like, if you were to do a 3-month thing, like set my budget, here's how much I'm willing to spend over this time. And then the thing you're really focusing on is, okay, how much do I pay for one click? Which is a tough question. And you're really only going to know after you've tested things out, but it'll just be, okay, now it's like, we're only showing to people who are interested in our product. We're not showing anyone looking for the city bus tickets, just the charter buses. And then how much should we be paying for that click? So that's part of it. But then there are also additional tools on top of this, which is devices. So Facebook and Google, if you advertise with them, you can show up on any cell phone or desktop or tablet. But then what I see a lot of times is, oh, you do great on desktop, but for whatever reason, nobody is signing up or nobody is purchasing your product on the phone, which really is like, that means you should be improving your website for the phone. But then what I do, I don't really do people's websites. I'm just with the ads. And so I'll tell them, okay, we should make the site better. And then I'll say, oh, Chris, thanks, but that's not our priority right now. But then as an advertiser, it's like, okay, well, what I'm going to do is just not show anything on the device or on the mobile phone. Or the other option is there's something called the bid adjuster. And without getting too complicated, you can say, in short, I'll pay $1 for someone who's on their desktop, but only 25 cents if someone is on their phone. Because earlier I was talking, the best strategy is really just like bid as cheap as possible, 1/4 what Google says. And so it might be, yeah, I know that we don't do well on our phone, but if I can get by with like a 10-cent click, I would actually do that all day because one sale could be worth like $1,000 for me. And so the other thing is, I was talking a lot about conversion tracking and that's how you ultimately gauge your ads, but that's an imperfect system. And a lot of times if you can just get a bunch of people to your site, eventually someone's going to start getting interested in buying. And so the whole point of this manual adjustment thing is Google says, oh, there's 1,000 factors that impact your ads. That's true, but there's really like 5 big ones. It's different devices is the number one biggest factor. People will do great on desktop, terrible on the phone. Okay, that hurts when you realize you've spent a bunch of money on your phone and it hasn't worked. But then the silver lining is you can just adjust your spend, double down on that. The other one is times of day. So weekends. Some companies do terrible and some companies get all their sales on weekends. Like for the insurance brokers, I would sort of bet that a lot of them would be going 9 to 5, like during their day job. But then I worked with my very first client were people that sold tickets, like baseball and concerts. That was almost all at like 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock, right when people get off work. And so what's nice about that is if you know everyone's searching for my thing or everyone's looking at this time, let's just spend it there. The other side of that coin is, it might be, we have a lot of people answering the phones that get off at 5 or work 9 to 5. So we only want to run our ads 9 to 5. And so just by not wasting any money on that different time of the day, you're immediately going to go get better performance. And then just what I see is these times and devices, they only work like if you go in and tell Google or Facebook. And so by default, it's going to go, we'll show your ad to everyone in the US, all devices, all times of day, which is actually a good way to start at the wide net. But then once you run these ads for a bit and you have your conversion tracking set up, you're going to realize we're not getting any sales like outside of work hours. So then our two options are, one, we could just completely shut off that budget, or the other option, which I think is more interesting and to a strategy standpoint, is, yeah, we'll still advertise to that audience, but we're only going to do 1/10 of what we do during the day. And then this can all get a little bit like tricky setting it up, but I just want people to know it's like, these are the options you have. If you do the manual adjustments, it can get tricky, but it's only like 2 or 3 areas you really need to focus on. And then my last slide before I open it up for questions is just my own business. Click Targeter is the name of my agency. It's just Google Ads. And so I've done like a lot of Facebook and all that in the past. I don't do any of that anymore just because Google can kind of keep me busy. And then I have a 90-day setup to where help people figure out their initial audiences, help people set up the conversion tracking, just because a lot of people mess that up on themselves. Run the ads for 3 months. Okay, what are our good keywords? What are our bad keywords? But then after about 3 months, we'll kind of figured out the keyword thing, the audience. Well, I figured out how much it makes sense for that person to pay per click. Then after that, you can just really run these things on autopilot. And so that's my one selfish pitch for the presentation. But what questions do people have on everything? Abby, yeah.
Yeah, I have a question on like the tracking and performance.
Mhm.
Obviously that's important. And like, do you find when you get a new client, when you're reviewing what they have set up, do you have any like tells or like ways to see like, oh, this pixel is set up correctly for this, or what's something like people can look out for that?
Yeah. So, every question was about conversions. And a lot of times when I'll meet a new client, it'll be like, hey, something's not right here. I don't know what it is. And that's almost some variation of your conversion tracking is not set up right. And so, when I'm in that situation, like, what do I look to? The first thing is I look for the tags.
Mm-hmm.
And I was telling you about this tool, the Tag Plugin Assistant.
Does that work for all pixels or is it just Google pixels?
It works for just Google, but there are other, like Facebook has its own version of this. And so the general idea is you want to check for, first of all, do they even have the tag on their page at all? So if you say, hey, someone's off and you can see they don't have the tag, that's like a major red flag. It's like, you definitely don't have the conversion set up right. There's a good chance they're probably doing the automated ads with the conversion tracking, which is like the formula to go completely haywire. And then the other problem people have is, okay, we actually do have the tags installed, but then the conversions aren't configured correctly. And so that's a bit harder to tell just off the bat, this is a little bit technical, but there's another plugin called the Data Layer Checker. And you might know what this is just because you're a freelancer, but essentially a lot of people's conversions might be, for example, filling out a form is really common. And with some forms, it will actually push an event towards the data layer. This is kind of like technical, but I mean, there are tools that you can use, and I have some that are plugins that'll just show, okay, what all events have happened on this site, like since I've done this session. And so that's how I can see, oh, you did have the tag on your site, but when I went and filled out your form, I could see that no event got pushed to the data layer. By the way, that's not like 100% perfect way to tell. Like there's some ways they can have it and not go to the data layer. But no, in short, the first thing you do is, okay, do these people even have a tag at all on their site? I would also look for, is there conversion on like Shop, or is it on like some sort of third party thing? Just because it's like, okay, they might have all the tags installed, but if their websites aren't talking to each other, that's a red flag. And the other thing with mine and with yours probably is if someone's ads are doing great and they're killing it, they're not going to like come in and have someone like make a bunch of changes to it, once it's set up. So I almost going into all projects I just assume that there's something messed up here. And then, my process is check for the tags. If they do have the tags on everything, then you gotta check for the configuration. And then really the best way to see this is ultimately just look at their Google Ads account or their Facebook ads. And then you can see, okay, you do have the conversion set up, but it's like you were actually tracking a page view as a conversion. So that's where you have like 1,000 conversions instead of like your actual real number. But no, conversions, this is the most common. This is also the number one most expensive mistake. And so this is why I wanted to focus on this. Cause like you can do figure out our best ad, have it, tell us what to do, but without the conversions, everything goes haywire. Josh?
Kind of just a question on like AI related to ads. What are you seeing as far as like AI technology in relation to digital advertising and like either managing it by itself or like something that you can utilize? What are you seeing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the one thing I see, I do Google Ads more. That's why I've been talking about Google Ads a lot during this talk. But Google has recently changed their whole like setup flow for new advertisers. And so in this slide, I'm talking about how you have the two options. You can set up things manually or automated. It's really going to just by default, we start everyone on the AI campaigns, and then you have to opt out of it to do these manual. And so a lot of people don't even realize that this is an option anymore to like go in and tell Google exactly like the different search you want to show up for. But no, the whole trend is, basically it's like, don't let the people set up the ads themselves. We'll set it up for you. Kind of why it stinks too is this is also like an answer to the trend question, but really the best advertising strategy is this whole idea of spend as little as possible per click. Just be really targeted with your audience. Don't show to anyone who is not going to buy, which is great for the small businesses, but that is not great for Google. And so that's kind of like my theory on why they're heading this way. Just because, the more people are targeted and the more people are picky, it's like they don't make as much money. So the other trend that I see with AI is I think it's almost used as like a great business tool for Google. And what I mean is it's like not in terms of advertising, but just it's like in terms of being able to sell our own like ad slots. And so like to the regular like small business on the street, it seems like it's such a great thing. But then this whole like lack of transparency is a huge issue. This other trend I see. And then, yeah, it's like, Google took away the "Don't be evil" slogan. And so it's like, basically, I think the trend I see is just like kind of a pushback now, within the whole like Reddit pay-per-click group. But, then the other trend, and I was telling Pam about this earlier, is so first of all, the bad part of AI is it's like not transparent. It'll spend on sometimes the worst performing ads. The good part about AI though is that once you get these things set up, this ongoing management can go really smoothly. And so basically the whole trend now is just kind of like get things set up right the first time and then leave it. But then the caveat on that is, oh, by the way, if you do these smart campaigns, you really can't just set it up and leave it because Google's like changing everything constantly. And so that was a lot. But no, yeah, the general trend is just, it's going more automated, but then like it's almost getting like more and more messed up. The bad accounts I see are like even more haywire now than ever before. And so, yeah, the whole AI thing is a double-edged sword where it can save you a ton of money, but it can also like waste you a ton of money if set up wrong.